God morgon och välkomna till det här seminariet, Skyddet av kulturarv. Jag heter Jan Nordvall och jag är generalsekreterare vid Sveriges Hembygdsförbund. Det här seminariet sker mot den uppenbara bakgrunden av invasionen av Ukraina och den totala förstörelsen av civil infrastruktur, bostäder och också kulturarv och kulturmiljöer. Vi arrangerar det här seminariet tillsammans med Kulturarv utan gränser. Birgitta Johansen är här vid min sida. Otroligt roligt att så många har valt att ansluta sig till det här seminariet. Jag hoppas vi kommer att få en riktigt bra konferensdag. Så varsågod Birgitta.
Ja, jag är alltså ordförande för Kulturarv utan gränser Sverige. Och vi har sedan starten 1995 bedrivit återuppbyggnads- och utvecklingsprojekt i en massa länder där kulturarv hotas av krig och kris. Och vi vill då att man ska arbeta de här projekten med kulturarvet som både en rättighet och en resurs. Och att det ska samtidigt då behandlas ansvarsfullt och med respekt. Och vi vill vara med och bygga professionell kapacitet. Men alltid med projekt som involverar den lokala befolkningen. Lokalsamhället. Och det är många kulturarvsexperter från Sverige som har varit ute i världen och bidragit med sin kunskap under de år som gått sedan 1995. Men det är ju också så att de har fått med sig hem kunskaper och erfarenheter om kulturarv och samhälle. 2016 så blev de 3 kontoren på Balkan självständiga stiftelser med egen lokal personal. Och därför så försöker vi nu då verka för att det här ömsesidiga utbytet av kunskaper och erfarenheter mellan Sverige och andra länder då med utsatt kulturarv, att det ska fortsätta. Det finns så himlans mycket att lära och inspireras av andra. Under de närmsta åren så är Ukraina vår prioritet. Det har ni nog nästan räknat ut. Och när Jan i våras hörde av sig och ville göra ett seminarium egentligen per omgående så blev det inte. Men vi sa direkt att nej, men det här hoppar vi på. Och så bestämde vi oss för att vi tillsammans kunde satsa lite mer och lite större faktiskt. Och det har vi gjort här idag. Och vad vill då vi på KUG med det här? Jo, vi ser att det finns 2 ändamål som vi vill bidra till. Det ena är att kunskapen om Rysslands aggression mot Ukrainas befolkning och landets kulturarv sprids. Och att engagemanget för Ukraina underhålls. Det är ju jätteviktigt. För när kriget tar slut så måste det finnas vilja och beredskap att ta hand även om kulturarvet. Och vi på KUG hoppas kunna hjälpa till då med att börja skapa projekt utifrån behoven i Ukraina. Det andra ändamålet är att vi vill hjälpa till att sprida insikten att det förändrade säkerhetsläget även påverkar hur vi bör tänka och agera kring kulturarvets skydd i vårt eget land. Det som händer i Ukraina skulle kunna hända här. Vi har tagit hjälp av Gunilla Kindstrand idag för att hålla ordning på oss alla som ska prata. Och Gunilla är journalist med en liten profil åt kulturarvshållet. Varsågod Gunilla.
Tack så mycket. Ja, vi är ungefär 140 personer som deltar i det här seminariet idag. Och det är ovanligt många samhällskompetenser som deltar och många olika intressen som är representerade. Ni är från näringslivet, Svenska kyrkan, myndigheter, offentliga institutioner, ideella, lokala och centrala föreningar. Det är en stor spridning över landet också, vilket ju är väldigt roligt att se. Det här seminariet kommer att spelas in och redigeras lite grann och läggas ut i efterhand på Hembygdsförbundets hemsida, hembygd.se. Första delen, det är ju 2 akter det här. Första delen har ett internationellt fokus och hålls huvudsakligen på engelska. Huvudtalare är som ni vet Ihor Poshyvail som är chef för Maidanmuseet i Kiev. Och vi kommer få en lägesbeskrivning och en berättelse därifrån förstås. Efter det öppnar vi för kommentarer och frågor ifrån er. Ställ era frågor och era kommentarer i chatten. Ställ dem på engelska så kommer det gå fort för oss att leverera dem härifrån den lilla studion på Hembygdsförbundets lokaler i Stockholm. Efter det samtalet så kommer det vara en speciell panel som också kommenterar det internationella läget. Första delen avslutas på svenska och då är det fokus på UNESCO och Unescos konventioner och roll här. Sen är det en kort paus som jag tror kommer att inträffa ungefär 10:30 och därefter blir det ett block med ett nationellt fokus och också där är ni förstås väldigt välkomna att delta. Mer om det senare. And now I'm very pleased to give a warm welcome to Ihor Poshyvail, director at the National Museum of the Revolution of Dignity, Maidanmuseet. Ihor, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Thank you so much for inviting me to this very important digital conference. And the previous movie is very, very emotional and very, how to say, illustrative what's going on here in Ukraine. But I will provide you maybe with much more detail how Ukraine respond to the war, especially in the cultural heritage field. So I'll try to switch to my presentation. I hope you see it. Okay. Do you hear me? Because I'm very sorry because we have some problems with internet connection, with electricity, because a lot of blackouts.
Yeah, but everything is okay.
Okay, so I'm director of the Maidan Museum, the institution which was founded in 2014 as a grassroots initiative during the Euromaidan protests in Ukraine, and in a few years it became a governmental state-run museum and memorial complex. But also when the war started, I was among activists who initiated creation of a Heritage Emergency Response Initiative, briefly HERI. Therefore, we planned, by the way, to open our new museum, which we nicknamed at the Museum of Freedom, because 9 years ago, in the center of Ukraine, in its capital city of Kiev, really Ukrainian nation did their main civilization choice to move towards democratic society, to move towards dignity and freedom. And the National Memorial and the Heavenly 100 and the Revolution of Dignity Museum, this is the complete title of the Maidan Museum, has progressed from public initiative to a state institution and to become an important symbol of the national memory, freedom of rights and cultural expressions. And we planned to launch construction of the Maidan Museum in the very heart of Kiev, in an authentic place where the massacre took place, but not only massacre, but 94 days of a great hope for the whole Ukrainian nation of the future. That was a very important period, and I hope that in Sweden you also witnessed that periods of inspiration, of great solidarity inside Ukraine and outside of the world, when Ukrainian nation really was inspired to join the European Union family and community. And we planned to open this new museum as not a historical museum, which tells a very important history of the past. We wanted to create it as a platform to build our future. And therefore, this 6-story building, which was designed by a German company from Berlin, according to international competition, is conceptualized as a multifunctional space with not only exhibitions to display historical narratives, but with House of Freedom, Children's Museum, creative laboratories, art studios, and platforms to experiment, generate new senses and perspectives, and of course, develop cultural and civil activism. But And we see there is a big demand in Ukraine to develop its cultural sector, because since regaining our independence in 1991, a lot of Ukrainians started to rediscover their cultural identity. And today the cultural sector in Ukraine is quite big. Right? I hope you see it.
Yeah.
The cultural infrastructure in Ukraine is quite big. Its statistics, some figures before the war. So for you to understand how active Ukrainian cultural sphere was before the war and how vulnerable it became, especially after 24th of February, when the large or full-scale aggression of Russian Federation started in Ukraine. And of course, you have seen this very emotional video before, and maybe you recognize some slides, some pictures, some images that after 24th of February, we witnessed a massive attack, not only on the military facilities, on military infrastructure. And here you can see the image of Hostomel airport near Kiev. And here you can see on the background the damaged unique aircraft, cargo aircraft, the biggest in the world, which is named Mria, a dream in Ukrainian. And it was damaged also not because of the military purposes, but because of a symbol. It was very important Ukrainian symbol. But of course, not only military, but civil infrastructure was attacked. And also here you can see some pictures from Irpin, a satellite city of Kiev, very close to capital city. But sure, culture was also one of the main targets for the Kremlin regime. And the cultural losses are dramatic. The scale is very huge. And here you can see some examples. This is the Orthodox Church, wooden one, in the village of Yazivka, Zhytomyr region, very close to the border with Belarus. It was one of the cultural objects in the heritage list which was damaged. And of course, also some images from other region, from Sumy region. You can see the Ohtyrka local art and history museum before and after 24th of February. And of course, very dramatic and world-known image of Mariupol theater, which was also damaged by Russian air bombing. It was not only a cultural object in that time, it was a shelter for hundreds of civilians, of local people, who tried to find shelter inside the theater and who expected that this is a safe shelter. There were a lot of inscriptions around the building that children are inside, civilians are inside, but this did not prevent Russians from air bombing and destroying almost completely. So also some dramatic images from the destruction of cultural infrastructure, and some very humble statistics. Over 500 objects of cultural heritage damaged, destroyed in more than half of the regions of Ukraine. This statistic is very conditional, because it will be much more, especially when Ukraine deoccupies its new territories. We don't have permanent access and no information what's going on with cultural heritage in occupied territories or in the territory of on the front line of territory close to front lines. But you can see some general figures, and these statistics are very dynamic. It changes every day. That so many places, cultural sites, historical buildings, religious churches, cathedrals, synagogues, and even mosques have been damaged. Of course, museums, a lot of museums, libraries, archives, theaters, monuments. And it's according to official statistics, which you can find in the website, official website of the Ministry of Culture and Informational Policy. And there are much more detailed information about these damaged or destroyed objects, their status, cultural heritage list. So if you are interested in more details, you can find much more detailed information. So when we faced this unexpected large-scale war, aggression, attacks all over Ukraine, of course, it was understandable that we should do something. It's quite shocking for us also that Ukrainian, at least cultural field, cultural sector, was not ready to protect itself from the such like massive attack. The war started in 2014, and we tried to do a lot. We learned how cultural emergency response system works in other countries. And we do a lot of actions, like we provided workshops, training. We tried to create mobile first aid teams. We tried to adapt, adjust international cultural response methodology, a lot of handbooks, toolkits, but it was on a horizontal level. It was mostly initiated by cultural activists. On the governmental level, it was not so easy. Maybe because still, since Soviet times, culture is not the priority, unfortunately, especially in times of emergencies. Humanitarian aid is the priority, but cultural aid is considered to be something separate, not so important. And we are well aware today that there are international global approach to cultural heritage. Cultural heritage is unseparate part of human beings, and it should be provided in a parallel or together with the humanitarian aid or humanitarian responses. But in Ukraine, it was a little bit different. So, for example, my museum, the Maidanmuseet, was one of the initiators of creating a kind of a center together with other museums and cultural institutions to build capacities, to develop capacities, institutional, individual. We participated in international trainings like ICROM's training, First Aid to Cultural Heritage. I personally participated in this training in Amsterdam, in the United States. And these trainings are very practical, instrumental, and they are usually provided in a coalition. For example, Smithsonian Institution participates, UNESCO, ICOM, ICROM. So due to that new, for us, experience in protecting cultural heritage in times of emergencies, and especially in times of conflict, in times of war, because it's a little bit different from times of disaster. We tried to summarize the general knowledge and experience and try to disseminate in Ukraine. But of course, when I received so many international calls from my colleagues abroad, representatives of international organizations, in the 24th of February, in the very morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, I waked up in Kiev from explosions. And a few hours later, I got a lot of calls with a very simple question: how we can help you? It was a simple question, but very hard to answer immediately because it was a little bit a chaos. And we previously, my team and of course, Ministry of Culture tried to at least to coordinate our activities. And we had some instructions and we have some understanding what should be done. A lot of cultural institutions in Ukraine were prepared. They packed their collections. They dismantled permanent and temporary exhibitions. They relocated objects to safer storages, but not all of them. But of course, on the 24th of February, despite of all our trainings and previous preparations, it was not easy to understand the priority steps. Because, for example, we created in my museum the response team with very clear roles for everyone. For example, evacuation team, documentation team, transportation team. But it was not easy because, again, it was very unexpected morning for majority of Ukrainians, despite we talked a lot about the possible war, full-scale war. We talked about this for months before. But can you imagine that even in Kiev region, a lot of civilian, not only military, but civilian infrastructure was damaged. For example, a lot of houses and dwellings, even of my staff members, were damaged in that morning because of explosions. So my staff member, of course, they first of all took care of their families, of their relatives, and it was not easy to activate the whole team according to that emergency plan we had before. But because our collection was prepared, we had marked our collection and we packed a lot of them. It was much easier for us to do very important steps to evacuate our collection. So the first action needed, and of course it's like in general, but we need emergency response system. We need network and of course capacities to make this system and network very active. Documentation was also one of the main problems in our situation because Ministry of Culture did not have the complete inventory of those museum collections, of archive collections, and it's a kind of a bit of problem. The similar challenge we had in 2014 when Crimea was occupied and eastern regions of Donbass and Luhansk also occupied, and central authorities did not have complete inventory. And in Ukraine, 99% of cultural institutions, I mean, museums, archives, libraries, theaters, they belong to national or local municipal governments. Therefore, it was a big challenge to understand what we should protect. I mean, central government, what kind of coordination and aid needed in that period. So in that situation, we had to very quickly respond to the threats, and we created the Heritage Emergency Response Initiative, a few people, and we very quickly started coordinating with international organizations, with national and local governments. We created a network of cultural activists. So in a week after the large-scale war started, we were quite active. And we, in that period, clearly understood what we should do. But in general, you see what is our mission, of course, to protect cultural heritage, especially in wartime. And it was important to us to assess the needs, and of course, to assess and document the losses and damages. And of course, we do all this work to prepare for stabilization, for early recovery, and of course, post-war reconstruction. And as a final result, modernization and developing resilience of Ukrainian cultural sector. One of our main major activities in this situation are field trips, because they provide us a complex information about the situation of the damaged objects, of the needs from the ground. We try to document those objects. We are making damage and risk assessment according to ICROM's methodology. Together with ICROM, we developed application for mobile phones. So it's a kind of a centralized system, and we have a centralized database which enables us to to work out priorities for interventions, priorities for early recovery, for stabilization, and later for post-war recovery. You can see some images from our field trips. Churches, museums, even civil infrastructure with some cultural objects. In the bottom, you can see this famous ceramic rooster, which became a symbol of Ukrainian resilience, which was also saved from the block of flats in the town of Borodyanka, very close to capital city of Kiev. And we are happy that it is in the Maidanmuseet collection today. And during our field trips, we also collect objects, collect oral stories from the ground, because we create a archive of the war, but maybe not only of the war, we collect stories about how civil population resist, how culture resists to the war. And so our collection is quite big, and we prepare different exhibitions because for us it's important to tell the story, how cultural identity is in Ukraine has become target for Putin regime, what we do, how cultural heritage is important for local communities, for the whole nation in general. And therefore, our field trips, we named our so-called complex character. We try to do a lot simultaneously because to some regions there is a limited access, and any kind of field trip requests a lot of efforts and a lot of resources, time, human, financial. We had to got special permissions. We had to equip our team. So when we go to the field, sometimes military staff escort us because in the occupied region it is not safe to document these objects because they are undermined, or they are mined, a lot of mines around. And so it's a very complex work which is done in coordination with Ministry of Defense, with our Ukrainian army, with national police, with Ministry of Culture, local governments. And so it's one of the main directions of our initiative. But also it was important for us to provide cultural institutions with those needs in the very beginning. And most of cultural institutions needed packaging materials and protection equipment. For example, to evacuate collection, protect collection, they needed very simple things which we do not have in enough quantities in Ukraine. For example, cardboard boxes, scotch, a lot of kind of packaging materials, very simple, but not affordable in Ukraine. And slowly we collected all the needs. We had a special survey in the very first days of the war. We provided this survey, sending the enquete to many cultural institutions, asking them what is the situation in the ground, what they need, what should be done, what kind of help they need. And we got a lot of responses. And on the basis of that assessment of needs, we sent requests to many international organizations. Also, we coordinate our activities with Ukrainian Ministry of Culture. And Ukrainian Ministry of Culture is working on intergovernmental level. And on the EU level, on the level of the ministers of cultures of many EU countries. And so we can see that we got a lot of materials and protection equipment and even help to evacuate some of collection. And we needed some costs for transportation, for protection, for organizing safer storages, for providing storages with some protection system. And so you can see at least some of the of those international organizations and governmental institutions which helped us, and we are very grateful to them for this fantastic help. But for us, it was also very important, this display of solidarity with Ukraine, much more important than even getting those very important materials. And here you can see the inscription or the message, very simple, a message which we have found in one of the loads from Europe, the message from a Louvre team: "Good luck, we are with you." For us, it was very emotional and very, very moving sign that the whole world supports us in our fight for our future. Of course, a lot of financial support was provided to the ground from European Union, from Europa Nostra, and by the way, thanks to Europa Nostra, this is an association of hundreds of cultural institutions all over Europe. We managed, together with support of ALIF and Global Heritage Fund, to launch the Solidarity Fellowship for Ukraine, and 100,000 euros was donated, was fundraised and donated, and we provided 500 euro stipends to over 125 Ukrainians. Those Ukrainians who displayed some courage and some actions to protect cultural heritage, especially in the occupied territories. And we got a lot of fantastic stories because when we launched this Solidarity Fellowship, we asked people, it was a kind of a competition, and we asked people to provide the explanations why this person deserves to get this fellowship. And we got about 2,000 applications and fantastic stories, because really on the ground, a lot of people from museums, libraries, archives, they risked their lives, and they rescued not their families, first of all, but their collections and their teams, and try to protect their buildings. And in many situations, we have traumatic moments when museum leadership was kidnapped, for example, as happened in Melitopol, in Melitopol Museum. Also, a lot of we had some dramatic situations when Russians with guns entered cultural institutions and forced museum people to collaborate with them or to leave the buildings. We have a lot of facts of looting of our collections, and of course Mariupol. Today, a lot of information about Kherson, that Russians rob and loot and retransport Ukrainian collections from Kherson to Russia. So that's why it was important for us to monitor what's going on, and also to document the crimes against culture, to monitor the situation, especially in those locations which were not accessible to Ukraine officially. It was very helpful cooperation with the Smithsonian Cultural Heritage Initiative and with the Cultural Heritage Monitoring Lab in Virginia, which is based in the Natural History Museum. They organized monitoring of over 30,000 cultural sites in Ukraine due to satellite monitoring systems. And they were very instrumental for us, because they do not only provide us information what's going on in the not accessible for monitoring and control territories, but they also provide us proofs that this or that cultural object was damaged deliberately, intentionally. This happened with the famous Ivankiv local history museum, which hosted unique collection of naive arts, especially Maria Primachenko naive art paintings. and Maria Primachenko was included into the UNESCO Heritage List as the World Heritage Artist. And Ivankiv is the small city north to Ukraine, and this was the first museum to be damaged intentionally by Russian missiles. The second cultural objects which was destroyed deliberately was the museum in the village of Skоворodinivka, close to Kharkiv. It's the museum which is devoted to Grigory Skovoroda, very famous and very symbolic philosopher and man of culture for Ukrainian nation. And it was a historical building where Grigory Skovoroda stayed and lived. So the building itself is a cultural treasure and cultural value, and it was completely destroyed by Russian intentionally missiles and bombing. So we also document crimes together with prosecution office, together with local national police, because we have some capacities for 3D scanning, for laser scanning, which is provided us by Prince Claus Fund, Ali Foundation, UNESCO. And so a lot of our materials from our field trips, from our damage assessment is very important also for the prosecution officers who investigate not only cultural objects, but other crimes against humanity. So we, as I mentioned before, we provide damage assessments and recovery planning in very close cooperation with ICROM, ICOMOS, Ministry of Culture, and of course with the National Council for Reconstruction, which was founded by Ukrainian government. Some members of HARI, including me, we are members of this National Council for Reconstruction. And the council includes hundreds of experts in different fields. And based on our work, the Ukrainian government presented the National Recovery Plan in Lugano. And you can find it in English, especially concerning the culture recovery in internet, and can see those plans and those figures which our government draftly estimated in the time, but of course it will be changed because of still ongoing destruction of cultural heritage. Very important for us is, of course, providing trainings and guidelines. So we closely cooperate with UNESCO, with the ICROM, and Heritage for Peace initiative is very important. They provided us a lot of information concerning experience in protecting cultural heritage in Syria, in Iraq. Chief Association from Italy also organized some trainings concerning psychological treatment and burnout issues, because we have a lot quite severe traumatic effects, and a lot of people, not only civilians, but a lot of my colleagues in cultural heritage has severe effects of cultural and war trauma. And the first months we were very active, but with time, you know, there is a kind of a burnout. A lot of people need some recovery or rehabilitation, need some psychological sessions, training. So this field is also very important for us. I mentioned that looting processes by Russians, and so together with the ICOM, we worked out the red list for Ukraine, which is quite instrumental for the customs, for auction houses, and for Interpol to at least start tracking those stolen cultural treasures from Ukraine. And there are clear evidences that all that looting are not done only by soldiers in a random way. For example, a lot of art objects were found in Belarus in so-called flea markets. A lot of Ukrainian property was robbed from civilian houses, flats, including art pieces like paintings, some antique objects. But according to American researchers, including Brian Daniels, there were some articles in The Observer, in The Guardian, concerning that in Ukraine there are special groups of so-called Russian experts who hunt for Ukrainian treasures, historical treasures, Scythian gold, for example, for art treasures, some paintings, also paintings which of Russian artists who were born in Ukraine, who lived in Ukraine, but which are disputed and claimed by Russian Federation that they are Russian, not Ukrainian. So Russia continues to steal our history, and this is also very important to them, and it is proved there are such teams. So for us, it is important the international support in further processes of repatriation. And I mentioned field expeditions. So you can see some images from that, some maps and some documentation from the Cultural Heritage Monitoring Lab in Virginia. They provide permanent reports, very instrumental for us. And also some images how laser scanning looks like. It's very, very important for us for priority list developing and for further stabilization and early recovery planning. Of course, we have a lot of challenges, and our response should be high speed, immediate, and the situation is changing. We never considered that we would have blackouts a month ago. So cultural heritage, for example, museum collection today are endangered, maybe not so much from shelling. I mentioned those who are evacuated to conventionally safer locations, but from no electricity, no heating, because of no climate control. And of course, we have a lot of challenges based in the lack of coordination of policies and actions. We need crisis management leadership. We tried to raise awareness from the military side of the cultural heritage importance, and we tried to establish a kind of cultural heritage department in our Ministry of Defense or our military chief headquarters, so that the military can also be instrumental and helpful to protect cultural heritage during the military actions where possible. And there are some good facts. I'll show you a bit later. So what we have done before, I mentioned in the very beginning, we tried to adapt and create some very quick handouts, some guidelines, and here you can see some emergency response and salvage wheel. This is US methodology. We created the pocket response wheel. We even worked out the cultural protection playing cards for military. They look like this because it's important to train militaries to protect cultural heritage when possible during the military actions. And here are some facts during for example, preparing trenches. Our soldiers found some ecological findings, and they were their strategy was very nice, because they did not took this object for themselves as souvenirs, as happens many times in international or some local wars, especially in Syria, Iraq. But so they passed these objects to local museum. They contacted cultural heritage experts, and those objects found during military actions were protected. So for us, we need a very complex cultural emergency response and resilience system, and we have some understanding. We developed some priorities. in different fields, and you can see some major directions. And we propose our vision, our strategies to international funds like Prince Claus Fund, SIR, Cultural Emergency Response institution, which was launched recently in the Netherlands. So for us, we understand that this is a very important chance for Ukrainian cultural heritage to become much more resilient. We should not only reconstruct, rebuild what was damaged. We should modernize our cultural sector, and we should make it quite resilient. So this is some general ideas what should be done, because a lot of international colleagues ask how we can help you, what should be done. Of course, besides all that very important action that I mentioned, providing help to packaging materials, protection equipment, especially now, all that kind of generators, humidifiers, dehumidifiers, heating equipment. We need a strong helping to develop strong cultural policy, and of course, effective cultural sanctions to Russian Federation. We need advocacy and promotion of Ukrainian culture. We need inventory, digitalization of cultural property objects, especially immovable monuments, historical buildings, because it's not possible to protect them from missiles or air bombing. But only documentation, very deliberate documentation, will help us to rebuild after. So documentation of crimes is crucial, and we need support from international community to bring earlier or later all those documents to international courts, international tribunals. And of course, a lot of things on the national level concerning the strategy, plan, and the national system of cultural emergency preparedness and response. And what is very important for us is harmonization of Ukrainian and European legislation, as we are a candidate for as a member state to European Union. So this is so important. So that's in general, briefly. I know that I'm running off my time. Thank you so much for your attention. I will be happy to answer the questions. You can contact us by email. You can see what we do on our Facebook, and very soon we will launch our website, so that you can find much more information there. And in conclusion, I know that cultural heritage is very important not only to Ukraine, but to the rest of the world, because it's part of the world cultural heritage. And I'm well aware that we can protect it together. If we can be united, we can be active. And the Ukrainians are so grateful to the rest of the world for standing with Ukraine and helping us to protect our cultural heritage and to fight for our cultural identity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ihor. Thank you very much. I have a question about this illegal trafficking of cultural objects. Are there museums in Russia accepting the stolen items right now?
It's not easy for us to answer these questions because no information, and Russia behaves in different ways. Previously, before 24th of February, they organized so-called temporary exhibitions and took objects from Ukrainian museums, like from Crimea, paintings of Ivazovsky, for example, from Mariupol, for so-called temporary exhibitions. So for us, we don't have access, and we cannot monitor what's going on later, whether it's really planned temporary or it's a permanent. So whether they accept today, it's not, we don't know. That's why we call the international community to control, and also to control all those international exhibitions from Russia, Russian federations, because the Hermitage director recently, it was a scandal announcement that he said that all our exhibitions outside international exhibitions of Hermitage are also a kind of a special operation of Russian Federation. So it will be great to monitor the situation when the objects from Ukraine appear in Russia, in the traveling exhibitions provided by Russian Federation abroad. So it's very important, but I cannot answer that we know whether they accept those objects or do not accept, whether maybe they are hidden sometimes in a transit storage today.
Thank you. Birgitta.
I listened to you beginning of June this year, and it seems that the Russian aggression against places of worship has continued. Do you have any idea why they are a main target? It's sometimes a bit difficult to understand from a Swedish point of view, because the Russian, it seems that they are saying that Ukraine is the heartland of Russia, and at the same time they are destroying it.
There can be maybe a few explanations, not one. On the one hand, Russians target all the religious objects, sometimes deliberately, sometimes not, sometimes directly, sometimes not directly. I witnessed, and my team documented a lot of facts when Russians organize a kind of hospitals, storages, military ammunition, food storages inside the churches. Because on the one hand, they understand that it's a kind of a good shelter for them, that Ukrainians will not destroy Russian churches, the Ukrainian churches, even invaded by Russians. On the other hand, they use schools, they use museums, they use personal dwellings, and of course heritage churches as shelter for them, because they understand that this is very important community centers. And so it's kind of protection strategy for them on the one hand. On the other hand, they destroy, sometimes they destroy very important objects for Ukrainian identity, and with the aim to demoralize local citizens, especially in those cities and villages and towns which resist to the occupants. And therefore, to make local people fear, they destroy everything they see. Sometimes there are some facts from our intelligence services when they record the telephone conversations between the military. Sometimes they do it just for entertainment. They go in tank to occupied town, and they destroy, they just fire around, whether it is a private house, school, or church. So there are no rules for them, and one of the main their targets are civilians, to make them demoralized and full of fear.
Here's a question from the chat room from Anders Torslund in Gothenburg. Have you had any reactions of sympathy from your Russian colleagues?
This is a good, this is a very good question. Unfortunately, no. No reaction. I'm not speaking about sympathy. At least reaction. And our national ICOM committee was very active in trying to understand the position of ICOM Russia, at least in non-political issues concerning the destruction of cultural heritage, how they respond, and what their reaction, but no reaction at all. And also Ukrainian and ICOM National Committee, and also UNESCO National Committee try to be active, for example, appealing to international organizations like UNESCO to block all that previous meetings which were planned to take part in Russia. But unfortunately, even in Kazan, that scandal meeting, which was planned, I think, in spring, was not canceled by UNESCO headquarters. It was only postponed. this is very disturbing for us. We cannot understand what's going on. But sure that Russian, maybe some of our Russian colleagues, they understand what's going on, but they are afraid of the Putin regime. They have no voice at all. And but of course we expect that maybe they will communicate with us not in the open way, maybe not directly, but at least some indirect messages of support. But no, I don't know about such like reaction from Russian colleagues, unfortunately.
Okay. Birgitta.
You were talking in the beginning that the military and the politicians, etc., were not so interested in, they had no relation to culture at the beginning of the war. And I'm wondering, you said something about the military, that they need more education, but I wonder if the politicians, are they more interested now when they have, I suppose, realized that culture or heritage is, or culture is a main target for the Russians against, like you say, the Ukrainian identity? So do you have more support from the government or ministries, etc.?
Exactly. There is a shift in mentality concerning cultural heritage role and meaning from the high-level political and military establishment, because 3 or 4 months after, in the early summer, I hope there was a big shift internationally, because President Biden in the summit in Japan, I hope first time he said this is a heritage war. So he also admitted that it's not only against military and civil infrastructure. And in Ukraine, our president also started to speak about the protection of cultural identity in Ukraine. Was very important. Our Ministry of Culture and Informational Policy is quite active, but of course we need much more coordination with the military, with Ministry of Defense, with our Chief Commander, and we understand that the main priority for them are, of course, military action, not protection of cultural heritage. But closely, step by step, we communicate. We have a dialogue. We try to approach them. We provide with some information and models how this works in United States, for example, in European Union, where in some countries, in some army has special CPP, so-called CPP, cultural protection divisions or departments. So slowly there is a shift in the understanding that we should protect not only our civil infrastructure, military infrastructure, but also cultural heritage as well.
Mm-hmm. Ihor, here's a question from Gustav Nyqvist. As the Soviet era is also a part of Ukraine history, are you putting in efforts to protect Soviet monuments and cultural artifacts, etc., in Ukraine, like Stalin statues and such? I can imagine such objects being targeted by the Ukrainian population as a reaction to the invasion. Has this been the case?
Thank you so much. It's a very good and relevant to our situation question. In fact, we do not have Stalin statues at the moment, because in 2015, the decommunization processes intensively started in Ukraine. And after Maidan, after Euromaidan revolution, when Lenin statue was demolished on the 8th of December 2014 in the capital city of Kiev. And so then there was a law, and our public space was almost quickly decommunized, something like this. But of course, we have a lot of Russian time and Soviet time other monuments which are disputed today, very controversial. And for example, Soviet soldiers or some so-called heroes of the so-called civil war, like Shores in Kiev, or Katerina, Empress Katerina in Odessa, or to Duke in Odessa, some very controversial monuments, which are used by Russia as a propaganda. And so today there is a big discussion in Ukrainian society, and there is a big demand to take out, to clean up Ukrainian public space from that Russian Empire, Soviet Union, and the Russian Federation monuments, sculptures, symbolics. And I'm a member of the so-called Derussification and Totalitarian Commission at the Ministry of Culture. We have a big debate. And of course, we understand that we have to balance those processes. We cannot be like Russians, vandals, on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's important for us to understand and to how to say, to take all that myths and all the propaganda which was imposed in Ukraine for decades before. So it's a good time for us, at least, to provide more information, to have to launch a lot of discussions. And of course, central government's policy is that it do not take decision. It provides recommendations to local communities, and it's up to local community to decide the role of this or that Soviet era monument, or for example, Russian propaganda monument, what to do with it, what to do, just to demolish. And we have some ideas if it's a kind of an artistic, if a monument, for example, have a kind of artistic value, historical value, it should be taken to special location, at least now, so that later after war we can take much more fundamental and thoughtful decisions. But there is a big demand from Ukrainian society, not the government, not separate groups of radical people, but Ukrainian society to rethink all those objects in public space.
Mm.
Final question for me. You were concerning what we were talking right now about the citizens of Ukraine. How does this crime against cultural heritage affect them? Do we know anything about this? I mean, there is a lot of people listening here today that are representing this local community, and what should perhaps be done to take care of their reactions or to inform them?
I'm sorry, there was a break in connection. If I understand you well, how local communities, how Ukrainian population are becoming aware of that destruction in cultural field, and what should be done?
How do they respond to this? Do they feel the loss? Are they worried? Or
of course,
yeah.
Of course. Maybe you've heard, and maybe you've seen in your media that Ukrainians are very responsive to any kind of destruction immediately. Even if there is destruction, civil infrastructure on the streets, the buildings are damaged, Ukrainians are immediately try to, on different levels, on municipal level, on the volunteers level, activist level, to try to take out all the signs of destruction. They're very similar in cultural field. For example, a lot of people, like it was in Ivankiv, it was up to local people, local community, who immediately responded, evacuated, helped to evacuate the museum collection from fire. And at the moment, they still keep those objects in their homes, hidden, because they don't know what will happen tomorrow. Maybe a new attack from Russia. And so they take responsibility and protect their cultural heritage. In religious sites, like from churches, a lot of people took very precious and important to local communities religious objects, icons, for example, to their homes, and they hide them. It was similar it was in the Second World War. We have a lot of stories when very unique objects, religious objects or artistic objects were hidden, protected, and later on discovered and considered before as lost ones. So local community also are very responsive. They come and try to reconstruct, to rebuild, to cover the windows, to protect the monuments. Maybe you've seen this very illustrative paintings with our cultural heritage monuments protected with special walls with sacks of sand. And in Kiev, in a few weeks ago, you've heard that Kiev center downtown was attacked by Russian missiles and drones, and some monuments, the shelter of the monument in the very downtown was damaged, but a few days later, everything was repaired. So a lot of local people come, a lot of activists, not only cultural heritage professionals, but a lot of people come, and they're very responsive to any call from museums, archives, libraries, theaters. If there is a need, people come, and they come not only to do something, they provide the resources, they provide money. For example, I worked in the Honchar Museum before 2014. And when the large scale was started, the Maidan, the Honchar Museum made open call. They needed packaging materials and protection equipment. And in a week, they collected a huge sum of money from donations from Ukraine, not abroad. And they were able to buy the necessary equipment and materials to protect their collection. So a lot of examples in different contexts.
Ihor, I would like to invite our panel to make their comments. Anna-Karin Johansson, Secretary General of the Swedish National Commission for UNESCO, please.
Thank you so very, very much for this comprehensive, interesting, and very, for me, emotional overview of what has been happening in Ukraine. I think what is so striking for me is how the cultural heritage is very much in the center of what is happening, both when it comes to the aggression and the war, but also when it comes to the reaction from the society, so many different actors in Ukraine, and also population. I mean, the cultural heritage is really something that is what we own together, what we have together, what is binding us together. And I think that is also why we can see this very, very impressive reaction from you all in Ukraine. And a very big thank to you for what you are doing. I also wanted to comment on what you said about the World Heritage meeting. It is a fact that Russia was elected as the chairperson for the World Heritage Committee some years ago, and it was also planned to have a World Heritage meeting in Russia, in Kazan, this year. I mean, the war in Ukraine has caused a lot of work and a lot of diplomatic conflict in UNESCO, as in all UN agencies, and there has been attempts to move the meeting and also to replace the chairperson. Unfortunately, that has not been so successful. And I think that is mainly because, and this is something that I think we all have to kind of relate to and understand, that we live in a time when we see a very steep rise in countries that are not democratic, that are autocracies, and many of them actually don't oppose the war. And this is very, very sad. And as we see that in Ukraine, and we see that in the UN, and that is why it sometimes is difficult to change these kinds of things. And since UNESCO is an organization that is formed by the member states. These changes in the political situation in the world is very visible and very, I mean, you can feel it. But I assure you that within UNESCO, there is a very strong and very dedicated work going on to minimize the influence of Russia in the organization right now, and to very strongly condemn what is going on. Thank you.
Ihor, do you want to make a comment on this?
Yes, thank you so much for your comments and for this the message. I know that so many efforts are being undertaken by international UNESCO committees, and I know a lot of our partners in international organizations where Russians take some leading roles, and it's not easy, of course, but it's a kind of a fight. It's a kind of a battle, and of course we should be quite strong and try to do something, try to change the situation, and clearly understand that this is a kind of a front line. It's our front line, and for us in Ukraine, it's impossible, as I mentioned maybe before, for you to understand. I mean, the international community to understand that it's not the war of Russia against Ukraine. It's the war against all civilized and democratic world. I do remember that very emotional and very illustrative fact that in 1961, Nikita Khrushchev, you know, that was in that period, there was also very crisis. And Nikita Khrushchev, the Kremlin dictator, he said that Russia will destroy by Russian missiles Acropolis in Athens if needed to Russian strategic goals. And that time Greek prime minister answered to Kremlin dictator that Russia can destroy Acropolis, but Russia will never destroy the ideas of freedom and democracy, which was born there. So for us, it's also very important that the rest of the world not only provide us some material support, some help, but for us, any kind of effort to change the situation, to stop all that unbelievable aggression and unbelievable lie, and all that propaganda, and even all that dependence of the rest of the world, even cultural field, from Russian money. A lot of things should be changed, and that's why the new strategy on EU level, on the level of international organization, new rules, new strategies, and great results from this to stop any possible attempts in the future, because it's not, we speak today not only about Russia, some new very threatening tendencies we have in the Asia. So I'm afraid that we should definitely stop Russia to prevent other possible conflicts and wars in other parts of our planet.
Mm. Okay, I would like to give the floor to Susanne Thedéen, Swedish National Heritage Board.
Hello, everything. And first, thank you so much for your both important, strong, and emotional speech, Ihor. I think that all of us participating today will bear your testimony of the deliberate destruction of cultural heritage in Ukraine, and not least your photos in our memory. But we will also need to act, as well as spread your information on the status of the cultural heritage in Ukraine to the cultural heritage sector here in Sweden. The situation in Ukraine, of course, raises questions of crisis preparedness during peace and a completely other reality in times of war. The Swedish National Heritage Board has, during the whole war, drawn attention to the threat to and the damage of the cultural heritage in Ukraine and the severe consequences the war has caused. And our Director General has, among other activities, initiated to draw up a statement from the European Heritage Heads Forum that condemns Russia's invasion of Ukraine, among other things. During the whole war, the Director General had contacts on a regular basis with the museum director at the National Museum of History of Ukraine in Kiev, Dr. Fedor Andrushuk, in order to have updates on the threats and status of the heritage and collections, as well as discuss the need of various kinds of support. Among the supports is the fundraising for Ukraine's cultural heritage initiative of importance. It was launched already this spring and is administered by the Nordic Museum Foundation. The primary purpose is to provide financial support to the National Museum. The support will contribute to securing the collections and the work of rebuilding the museum as soon as possible. The Swedish National Heritage Board has also established contacts between Swedish research councils and foundations and research institutions and museums in Ukraine with the purpose of supporting future research projects. Finally, the National Heritage Board in Sweden will follow the most worrying period for Europe with the greatest seriousness and act according to our mandate and our obligations. And we want to emphasize our full support to cultural heritage professionals and artists in Ukraine. And we are deeply impressed by your brave contribution for saving the Ukrainian heritage. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Ihor, do you have any comments? Or?
Just to express our gratitude, we know that Sweden helps a lot to Ukraine, individually, directly, to a national museum, to other institutions, and we are so grateful to your support. Thank you.
And thank you so much for today, Ihor.
Finally, Birgitta Johansen, Cultural Heritage Without Borders.
Well, thank you, Ihor, for contributing today. I personally feel that your example is very important to us, not just concerning cultural identity and culture, but how you take your own destiny in your hands. That's impressive, and you do it for all of us. And from Cultural Heritage Without Borders, I would just like to say that we are interested in supporting ideas that could grow into projects. We have some seed money that could be put into planning and applying for grants. And of course, these projects should always include Swedish and Ukrainian professionals, and the starting point is, of course, the needs in Ukraine. So I'm hoping to hear from you in the future.
Yeah.
Hello, Ihor. I'm Jan Nordvall. I'm the Secretary General for the Swedish Local Heritage Federation. As one of the organizers of this conference, I'd like to thank you for your presentation and for your ability to participate in this conference. There was a lot of disturbing images and pictures that you've shown us, and I can assure you that my organization, which consists of about 400,000 memberships in Sweden throughout the country, our thoughts are with you, and as a big part of the Swedish civil society, I'm sure that many of our members share my view on this. So thank you very much, Ihor.
Ihor, thank you from all of us, and we will now continue in Swedish. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Då fortsätter vi på svenska, och då så ska jag ge ordet till Anna-Karin Johansson, generalsekreterare i Svenska UNESCO-rådet, och det ska handla om UNESCO. Varsågod.
Tack så jättemycket. Ja, och tack så jättemycket för att jag får möjlighet att delta på det här jätteviktiga seminariet. Som jag sa så var det väldigt berörande att höra och se både förödelsen och förstörelsen i Ukraina, men också den kraft som finns i så att säga, önskan att skydda och bevara kulturarvet. Men jag ska berätta lite grann om UNESCO och vad UNESCO gör i Ukraina. Och jag hoppas att ni kan se min skärm snart. Kan ni det?
Ja.
Ja, vad bra. Ja, UNESCO är ju FN:s organ för samarbete inom utbildning, vetenskap, kultur och kommunikation. Och grunduppdraget är ju att bidra till att skapa fred. Och det här är ju någonting som har varit UNESCOs uppdrag ända sedan 1946. Då UNESCO bildades direkt efter andra världskriget. Och den första raden i UNESCOs konstitution, den lyder... Ser ni att jag byter bild nu?
Nu är det bytt.
Men då ska vi se. Hoppas
Freden som central grundbult.
Ja, vad bra. Ja, men då har vi hittat rätt. Eller jag har hittat rätt. Det här som jag sa så är det här ett arbete som blir allt tuffare i UNESCO. I den tid vi lever i med allt fler auktoritära stater som vill begränsa såväl deltagande i kultur som fri information och kunskap för att det är så de ser på samhället och sättet att styra ett land. Sverige är ett av de länder som är väldigt starkt för yttrandefrihet, deltagande i kultur, kvinnors rättigheter. Men de här frågorna kallar vi faktiskt för motvindsfrågor idag för att man får kämpa hårt för dem i UNESCO men också i övriga FN-systemet. Men inom UNESCO så finns det ju en väldigt central uppfattning om att våra kollektiva minnen är av vikt för oss alla, oavsett vilka vi är och var vi kommer ifrån. Och det gäller ju platser som bedöms vara extra viktiga för vår gemensamma historia. Men det gäller ju också föremål men också praktiker. Alltså traditioner, seder och bruk. Och tanken är ju att om vi får möjlighet att bevara våra kollektiva arv från tidiga generationer så förstår vi bättre vilka vi är och var vi kommer ifrån och vart vi ska. Inom UNESCOs kultursektor så består arbetet till stor del av att medlemsländerna samarbetar genom UNESCOs konventioner och rekommendationer. Och det här är överenskommelser som har gjorts där stater har förhandlat och kommit fram till gemensamma överenskommelser om hur man vill agera i olika frågor. Och som man också åtar sig att följa. Och det finns 6 stycken kulturkonventioner som tillsammans bildar en helhet för att skydda, bevara och främja kultur. Och när det gäller just att förhindra kulturarvsförstörelse så är det 3 som är de viktigaste. Och det är dels Haagkonventionen och dess 2 protokoll som ska skydda kulturarv i händelse av väpnad konflikt. Det är en konvention om åtgärder för att förbjuda, förhindra olovlig införsel, utförsel och överlåtelse av äganderätten till kulturegendom och motverka illegal handel. Och det är världsarvskonventionen som ska skydda och bevara våra världsarv. Och arbetet där innebär ju också att man väldigt noga följer det kulturarv som finns inom världsarvskonventionen och som visar på att våra kulturarv idag står inför flera olika hot. Det är dels konflikter, men det handlar också om klimatförändringar. Det handlar om infrastruktur, det handlar om utvinning av råvaror. Stater som då har anslutit sig till UNESCOs kulturkonvention, de åtar sig som sagt på att följa de här. Det handlar om bindande internationella avtal. Men det finns en problematik och det är att de saknar egentligen sanktionsmöjligheter och straffrättslig verkan. Och därför så är arbetet med att skydda och bevara våra kulturarv, det bygger på de här överenskommelserna och att det bygger en förståelse för vikten av kulturarvet, vad det betyder för oss. Och det här är något som behöver lyftas fram av många aktörer, inte bara stater. Och som vi ser i Ukraina, i krig och i väpnade konflikter så respekteras inte de här överenskommelserna av stater. Vi känner ju till många exempel där kulturarvet har lidit stor skada i samband med konflikter och krig. I vissa fall för att det har hamnat i skottlinjen. Ibland på grund av krigets effekter, som Ihor pratade om här med brist, att om man inte har elektricitet så kan det leda till skador. Eller också för att det medvetet förstörs som en del av krigföringen. Och det här blir väldigt tydligt under kriget i Syrien, då Islamiska staten medvetet till exempel sprängde delar av världsarvet Palmyra. Och sen finns det också det här som också Ihor nämnde med plundring och smuggling. Och för det här finns det kan vara för att finansiera väpnade konflikter. Men det kan också vara människor som helt enkelt försöker överleva i mycket svåra tider. Och sen förstörelse av så att säga ideologiska skäl. Och ett exempel där är ju buddha-statyerna i Afghanistan som ju sprängdes i luften av talibanerna. Och det här är ju också brott som berövar människor deras historia och kultur. Och på lång sikt så handlar det om att, så att säga, vi ska visa respekt för varandras kulturarv och identitet. Och därför är det här också en viktig komponent för en hållbar fred. Men det finns också väldigt positiva exempel på hur det internationella samarbetet kan bidra till att rädda och skydda kulturarv. Och Världsarvskonventionens födelse hade ju som bakgrund att man samlades i det internationella samfundet för att flytta templet Abu Simbel i Egypten när man skulle bygga en stor damm som då skulle dränka det här templet. Och då insåg man att det finns så att säga gemensamma kulturegendomar, gemensam kultur som vi i internationella samfundet värderar så mycket så att vi vill bidra och hjälpas åt för att skydda det. Ett annat exempel med nutida är Angkor Wat i Kambodja, och det skrevs in på Unescos lista över världsarv i fara på grund av att det var olagliga utgrävningar, det var plundring och det fanns mycket landminor. Men det kunde sedan tas bort från listan för att man gjorde stora framsteg när det gällde skydd och förvaltning. Och det är ofta det som behövs. Som ni redan har hört så har Unesco varit aktiva i arbetet i Ukraina. Och jag tycker också behovet av att skydda vårt kulturarv har ju satts i strålkastarljus i samband med kriget i Ukraina. Och här har Unesco bland annat arbetat med att göra bedömningar av skador med hjälp av till exempel satellitövervakning, men också genom besök på plats och med hjälp av information från källor i Ukraina. Här samarbetar man ju jättenära med olika aktörer i Ukraina. Och hittills har Unesco på sin lista fler än 200 kulturegendomar. Här hade Ihor en större lista, och det beror säkert på vad man sätter gränser. Men det som är viktigt är att förstå att det är väldigt många monument, byggnader och platser som har förstörts i olika grad. Museer, historiska byggnader, kulturcenter, bibliotek. Vi såg ju bilder bland annat från Kiev där vi såg stadsbilden totalt förändrad. Det är också en förstörelse av kulturarv såklart. Unesco har också jobbat för att samordna ukrainska aktörer med internationella aktörer, där flera svenska institutioner också är med. Och framförallt i början erbjuda hjälp för praktisk hjälp när det gäller att skydda samlingar och kulturföremål. Ungefär sånt som Ihor också berättade om med förpackning, information om hur man kan göra. Och man arbetar också för att märka ut historiska monument med det blå emblemet som finns under Haagkonventionen, som ska vara till för att just markera viktigt kulturarv. Men det pågår ju också ett arbete att bedöma behovet av återuppbyggnad och återställande. Och det är såklart ett arbete som går sakta framåt och just nu är svårt att bedöma. Men det är ju otroligt viktigt för framtiden och i förlängningen hela mänsklighetens arv. Och det som ska finnas kvar som minne efter det som har hänt också. Och när kriget väl är slut så kommer det behövas mycket stöd till Ukraina för att reparera, återställa och också bygga säkrare strukturer för framtiden. Och det är viktigt att Unesco tillsammans med medlemsstaterna kan agera när kulturarv hotas under pågående krig. Men det viktigaste arbetet kanske egentligen är det förebyggande. För att när kriget väl är där så kan man göra mycket, men det blir också väldigt stora skador. Och här är den dialog som man kan föra i Unesco trots allt och de överenskommelser man har gjort som man kan sätta som press väldigt, väldigt viktiga. Man måste försöka fortsätta den här dialogen även om det är starka motsättningar i UNESCO just nu på grund av kriget i Ukraina. Man måste försöka hålla en stadig kurs. Och en del av det här, jag kan ta tillbaka det, en del av det här förebyggande är också utbildningsinsatser för att förebygga och väcka medvetenhet kring kulturens roll och kulturarvets roll. Det har ju också väckts i många andra länder nu genom kriget i Ukraina. Och här är UNESCO också aktiva i olika länder. Tar fram handböcker, genomför utbildningar och stöttar nationella institutioner. Men det är klart att medlemsstaterna har en otroligt viktig roll att spela. Och där har vi ju i Sverige ett bra nätverk för de här frågorna och det blir starkare och starkare för varje dag just nu. Ett exempel är på en aktör som man kanske inte förväntar sig är aktiva. Det är ju Försvarsmakten som har tagit fram utbildningspaket kring det här för att just försöka påverka i förväg om svenska militärer kommer in i den här typen av väpnade konflikter. Så att det här är ju en angelägenhet för hela internationella samfundet oavsett var skadan äger rum. Och där har vi i Sverige en viktig uppgift att stötta andra stater och väcka uppmärksamhet kring de här frågorna, delta aktivt i arbetet. Och jag tror att den här konferensen och andra liknande initiativ som har tagit också väldigt mycket kan stärka arbetet i Sverige. För vi ser ju i Ukraina vilken otroligt viktig roll just det här samarbetet mellan olika aktörer har och inte minst civilsamhällets deltagande och aktiviteter. Tack så jättemycket.
Tack så mycket Anna-Karin, tack. Och nu ska vi ta en kort paus på 5 minuter. Vi blir lite ojämnt i tiden men titta på era egna klockor. Om 5 minuter är vi tillbaka. Och då har vi alltså ett nationellt fokus. Tack så länge.